All right. Thank you all for coming. Sorry you have to listen to me back to back for those that you were in the first one and now this one. For those of you that are new to the room, my name is Niki Shimko. I come from Fort Myers, Florida at Golisano Children's Hospital via friends with all my friends at All Children's and John Hopkins there. So that's kind of how I got here. And we all flock to disasters and all of that. So to listen to our disaster story. A little bit of a background. I am the transport team manager. I also happen to be the Florida Neo-Pediatric Transport Network Association president. Been in part of this group for about 10 years. It makes up all the transport associations. Sarah, Megan, they've all been to some of the meetings, and Sarah's actually the secretary of it as well. We have all come together as a state and really work together on the better safe transport of neos and peds in the state. We meet quarterly. So having this land in my lap was kind of one of those, I was meant for this moment and I was born for the moment, I guess, is kind of where we go with it. Everything happens for a reason. I still sometimes question why. I have no financial disclosures. This is all about the hurricane, and these are some objectives I threw in there to really just talk about triaging and all of that. I'm going to set the stage a little bit. So we all have different disasters. I've lived in Florida, I don't know, since I was 15. So do the math, think how young or old I am, whatever. So I've lived through a lot of hurricanes. I've actually worked in the hospital through a lot of hurricanes. We do team A, team B. Some go in for the hurricane, some stay home for the hurricane. So as the manager of the transport team, I actually stay home. I'm on team B because the team really kind of shuts down. Once EMS shuts down, we ramp back up right after the hurricane passes. I go in and help at that point in time so that I'm somewhat rested and can kind of help. So a few days before the hurricane, my daughter's in Tallahassee at school. If anyone knows, that's where FSU is. I'm a Gator, which is in Gainesville. It's a logistic nightmare for me right now and a tug of war of rivalries, but whatever. But I was up visiting her. This was the path a couple days before the hurricane was hitting. We actually thought it was hitting Tallahassee, Tampa. We thought it was all going north. Living through so many hurricanes, we're like, okay, whatever. We know it can turn, blah, blah, blah. No one ever imagined it turning and doing what it did. So I'm at home. I'm taking these screenshots on my camera. This blue dot right there is me. And I live 6 miles from the hospital. And the hospital is actually closer to the Gulf than I am. And if you look at the timeline, 6 hours practically, we sat right there in the wall, outside of the wall of the hurricane. I went through Charlie. That was pretty rough. I went through Irma. It was pretty rough. That's the distance from my home to the hospital, 6 miles. This is just a little video. I knew this was gonna, let's see if I can get it to play. Oh, this is my backyard. It's just windy. I mean, it's whatever, but you're sitting like 10 hours through this going, is it gonna end? Whatever. There's just a clip of where the eye wall went. This video is not mine, so, but I am gonna play it. This shows the storm surge. And it's about a minute long of what the beach went through. That's roadways. Those are buildings. So right here is the major roadway. So you can see the water coming in. You see the buildings washing away. And then the next clip shows like, yeah. So we're sitting at home. We can't see this right now. We lost power. I still had internet a little bit. I didn't have power, but I was still able to use my phone. I still had cell service. But we really weren't noticing like what was going on. So you see how high it gets. We're gonna skip. Oh, and then it's washed out. And that's kind of what's left of the beach. Please hold. Then I see this. This is the parking lot to the hospital. So I have now known that the storm surge made it all the way to the hospital. I knew a few things though. I knew that our hospital, when we built it 5 years ago, no patient care on the first floor, built to code. All the windows were storm impact. So I knew we were okay. Our generator was above ground. So I knew the hospital itself was okay. It was just the water. We actually did not take water inside our hospital. Our adult hospital sits right next to us. It did breach the first floor. They did have the ER on the first floor. So they had to evacuate the ER up. So I was like, okay. Those are the things that they had done with Health Park. And like I said, the generator and the building to codes and whatever. Rewind to now my, not hospital side, but my Florida Neo PD side. We have a representative that's up at the state EOC who then would contact us if we needed to do any evacuations for Neo or peds. And that's kind of basic flow of it. He went up before the hurricane. We had been in constant contact. I was texting really kind of the night before. We had our plan in place. We have a list of who has what ambulances, what teams and everything. And we really just started this texting group to say, hey, here we are, let's go, you know, because you really never know where direct impact's going to land in that. So we've got East Coast, we've got West Coast, we've got everybody on this text thread. I had also heard one of the hospitals north of us had already lost a roof. So I was like, holy crap, what's going to really happen when the sun rises in the morning? Oh, whoever you believe in. By God's grace, I still had cell phone service in the morning, and I happened to see a notice come through to say, hey, 10 o'clock, let's jump on a board call with the group, with the state, just to touch base, make sure nobody up north in Charlotte County needs to move because they did have OB units. They have a makeshift NICU. Sarasota has a NICU. There's teams up there that may need help. Our hospital's standing, we're good. Our parking lot flooded, that's it, no problems. I get on the call at 10 o'clock. I didn't want to. I was like, I just lived through this damn hurricane. I've been up all night wondering what's happening. I don't really want to get on this call, right? We've all had that, right? We're like, we don't want to live up to our responsibilities. Being the president, though, I was like, I better get on. I better figure it out. Like, I've still got cell service. Next thing I hear, we're evacuating all of Lee County and Charlotte County. That's exactly what I did. I kind of just stopped. I went, wait, what? Did I just hear you right? And they're like, yep, ACA's shutting you down. I had no idea why. I still was not sure why. I'm like, okay, throw my clothes on. I'm running in. So I get in. I text everybody in the group. Yeah, that's the damage. So I didn't have much damage in my backyard. I just lost a fence and a tree. But probably should listen to those before I put some of those in, huh? I start texting everybody. I said, here we go. Time to go. I'm on the call and they're like, how many patients are in the hospital? And I said, last time I checked, we had 67 NEOs. I said, I think our capacity, we were up to about 76 patients. I don't know. Our hospital holds 129 beds. I said, so last I heard 67 NEOs. We had discharged everybody that we could before we left. Like, okay, great. Hang up the phone from the call. EMS bureau chief calls me. He goes, how many babies did you say? I said, 67. He goes, like 6 to 7? No, 67. He goes, okay, go do what you need to do. I'm like, okay, thanks. They really had heard in that meeting, 6 to 7. They thought, no big deal. We're going to handle this and it'll be just fine. So the state has an ambulance deployment plan. They had already deployed a bunch of ambulances to come to us. I throw my clothes on, I drive in. I don't remember the drive in. I'm in such a mode. I'm like, I remember taking pictures because I was like, I got to take pictures of this because I'm never going to remember it, right? Because I didn't. I kind of blocked out the whole drive-in. There were cars along the roads, trees weren't cleared, but it actually was a little bit more clear than I thought it was going to be driving in. Our water main had broke. We had no water. So Team A had been there for about 12, 24 hours, not able to really wash hands, flush toilets. They actually were pooping in bags because they were at the point where they couldn't flush the toilets. We were scooping it, putting it in bags, throwing it away. They tried overnight to fix the water main break and they couldn't. So that is what made them say that we were evacuating. The state really made it a priority to get the children's hospital out first. So that's why the ambulances came to us first, and that's why it became a priority for us to get the kids out. Obviously, we are now looking at wells for our hospital because we don't want to have to do this again. So I get there, and all of this becomes somewhat of a blur. I did start writing this down, a few days after. So a lot of it I can still remember, but it does become somewhat of a blur. But I get there, I learn about the water break. I'm in the command center with the leaders. How do you tell your staff you're evacuating your hospital after this major hurricane, who now all of Team A have lost their cars because they drove in. So now they don't have cars to take. So it really became this, we've all got to come together. We've got to do what's best for the patients and take care of us. So the leaders all went to their units, started talking. The lists of the patients became, trickling in, trying to figure out where we were going to start sending these patients. The house wasn't on fire. The building wasn't on fire, but we had constant people watching it for fire watch because our sprinklers wouldn't have gone off. That was the other biggest deal. We couldn't put out a fire if it started. And if you watched any of the news, there were a lot of fires that started afterwards. So we really talk about prioritizing. As I'm telling the staff with the medical director, hey, we're evacuating the patients, ambulances started pouring in. So the state had already deployed them. It took me 20 minutes to drive in. The state had already deployed them. They had already been on the road. They pulled in as we were telling them. You could see them on the camera, and the staff actually thought they were patients. I knew what they were, but I didn't realize that that's what they thought it was. But yeah, it was all these ambulances coming in to help us. That's great for your peds kids. Not so great for your neo kids. They're all stretchers. They don't have isolettes. So we'll get to what we did here in a second. Communication. Yes, we still had phone service within the hospital. Our two-way radios became the best means of communication. Has anyone ever moved a hospital? That move will forever be your drill, if it went well, for a potential evacuation. Everything I learned when we moved into our new hospital 6 years ago now, I learned from that. Some of the two-way communication with radios, really talking back and forth about what patient was moving, where they were going, what they were going to. Those closed loop communications is what we safely did with this that day. Every unit had a point person that had a radio. We had 2 radios in command center. I think we also had a radio at the point of where the ambulances were coming and going. So there was a person down with the ambulances saying this ambulance, this team, going up to that unit, getting that patient, whatever. The only thing we did is our NICU is very long. They like to work in the back eye, so they're not seen very much, which created a little problem. I would have had them move right up front by the front doors because people started to walk in and nobody was really directing them. Triaging then became our biggest challenge, biggest obstacle to overcome. Most of our peds kids were gone because we could get them in the stretcher. I mean, we could get them on the stretcher, we could get them with the adult teams, and we could get them out as long as we had the beds. So the NICU ones then became, who has beds? What beds are they? Are they level 2? Are they level 3? Can they go in an open crib? Are they in an open crib so they can go on a stretcher? Our closest facility was a half an hour south, but they weren't going to give us beds without staff. We're like, can't give you staff either. Like, I know you just lived through this hurricane too, but we can't give you staff too. We did end up sending some babies to them. The other closest were all 2 hours away. So you're thinking in a ground, can they maintain their temperature with non-neo teams and go? So it was really a matter of, it wasn't a matter of getting them out. It was figuring out the best place for these kids with the right people. So the triage really became somewhat not typical that I would imagine in a disaster. And these 2 were part of it, so I'm going to have them jump in at any point in time too. Some challenges. So I laugh because this is what it becomes, right? It becomes a lot of paper, pencil, notes. I did use Hicks forms from disaster training modules that have the transfer. I was thankful I used it. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. The biggest thing is our NEOs. Our NEOs were treating this as a transfer and not an evacuation. They were wanting to do discharge summaries on every kid so they could send the chart with the kid. And it became a struggle. I finally had to have the NEO come down and talk with me and say, I said, we are evacuating. I need you to get them out. We're doing this safely, but I'm not slowing down. So figure out on your end what you need to do. So we'll talk about some strengths and opportunities later. One thing I wish we had done though, is pre-printed face sheets. And this is what I would say in some of our opportunities is any disaster, if, a hurricane, we know it's coming. So we knew we could have pre-printed face sheets to have on every patient just in case. No one really thought we would evacuate, but, and then the master list as well. Everything was still working though. Our EMR, everything was still working. So we had access. Bed placement became the biggest challenge I really, really had to overcome because no one was controlling it. I was getting phone calls from the state, from ACA and Florida Hospital Association saying, these are the hospitals that have beds, you can send them. I have my main command center finding beds as well. The two aren't talking. And the state's sending me hospitals I didn't even know existed. And then they're trying to send me to the NICU that's 7 hours away, that's north. And I'm like, that's not gonna work either. So if I could say anything in this process, it was the bed placement. This is the piece that still needs to really be ironed out. This is Mike and I probably at about, 5 a.m. after about, I don't know how many hours. We started to look at landing zones. We knew we had one landing zone. We knew we had a backup because we always have a backup. We ended up making 4 landing zones. They ended up having a bulldozer. They cleared some of the trees. They made 4 landing zones so that the flights could come in and out. The first were ground because our weather was still unable to fly. This is where I do a little show and tell with some pictures. There's our friends right there, but that's our landing zone on the grass. This is our backup landing zone right there that we always have. So when they said send some north, we couldn't. The hurricane still sat over us. So there was so much weather going north that we were trying to really send them all south and east as much as we could. The state had relocated a lot of the aircraft resources to Orlando, which is Central Florida. The hurricane was sitting right over it. So as we're trying to evacuate, our resources were very limited in what we had. This is actually one of our other campuses where they had built 4 landing zones as well. And so these are our first few teams that came in by ground. And luckily, having the relationships from the teams and building those relationships over the 10 years, I knew which ambulances could hold 2 stretchers, which ambulances had 2 isolettes, which teams had what. So it was really beneficial to have all that information. I mean, that's how it happened. I mean, it really is. We learned a few things. Not all ambulances created equal. Not all of them have their inverters on to keep the isolettes powered. State ambulances came in and didn't have pediatric restraint systems. So we're loaning out some of ours from our teams because they didn't have pediatric restraint systems. The house isn't burning. I'm not going to just send 3 patients in a stretcher unsafely when I can do this safely. And I was standing that ground. Few other challenges. I already talked about the mentality of transfer versus evacuation. Families. I said we had 67. We had, so let me see what time we're at. We had only 20 families stay. So you think about all those other families that are out taking care of their houses, their families, their kids, their other kids. How do you get a hold of some of them? We couldn't. Some of them we couldn't get a hold of. Some of them we were able to get a hold of. We have a system. I'm not going to name names because I'm not disclosing anything, but we do have a system where it has the camera on the NICU babies, where parents have the login. They can look at their babies. We had actually gotten that during COVID. So we were able to hold up signs saying, we're okay, I'm okay, have somebody call us. So a family from Ohio called us to say, hey, we can't get a hold of mom and dad. We know they're okay though, and so we were able to give them that information because they had the information to call us to give us that information. These are just some other pictures. All of our friends brought us water and food and underwear, the essentials. Some more pictures. I call it controlled chaos. because it's really what it became. Yep. We had one FEMA team come in. That was a FEMA NEO team. So a FEMA team with the aircraft with an isolate. I'm just gonna say it. They were the ones that were on the ground for 3 hours, and then it became constant communication with security as well to really man the landing zones and that. So it really became huge conversations happening. We did move 81 patients in 36 hours. 62 of them were the NICU babies. I know I was saying 67. 5 of them actually ended up, some of them were discharged or went home with mom and dad. 8 were PICU, 6 were peds, 3 were peds oncology, and 2 peds ED patients. This is where they went all over the state. We were able to finally send, Orlando was the farthest. It is about 4.5 hours away. They did go by ground. This is where we were right there, just to give you, this is where All Children's is, just to give you landmarks. We moved 61 into the last one. 75, our major highway, flooded. And this was hours after the hurricane had passed. So Sarasota, which is south of Tampa, were driving down in their ambulance to pick up our last NEO. They got down here and got stuck. Like, how do we get back? The roads are closed. So we're like, oh, just, we're going to figure this out. By this time, it's almost after the 36 hours. I've gone home because I knew the last one was taken care of. I called Julie. Help. I don't know what else to do. I'm done. I've tapped out. I've started drinking my wine. Help me. They flew down and they were able to pick up the patient and drop the patient at Sarasota. The team then actually drove 5 hours around the flood to go back home. So it was kind of one of those, there are some major pathways that you don't anticipate happening. And then I said earlier, I'm a very big data guru, but this is, so 55 went by ground, 26 went by flight. Don't ask me if that adds up to all the numbers though, really. And then this is the breakdown. So our FEMA team, 34, our Florida team, 47. So 58% of the patients moved by the Florida teams, not by FEMA. And then this is really how it's broken down. This is your 31% of the FEMA. So really only 10% of the FEMA went by flight. The rest of it went by those ground state ambulances. So those are mostly your peds kids or your stable NICU babies that went in the open stretchers. Your Florida flight, 21%, FEMA flight, 9%, Florida ground, 30%. So if we had waited for FEMA to do all of this, it wouldn't happen in that time frame. We did keep our ER open after that. All of our ER stayed open. As kids came in, we triaged them. We either sent them home or we had them sent out. So we had 2 more NICU babies and 9 peds PICU babies. In the end, we had no safety events at all. Every patient got to the right location that it was supposed to, which was my biggest fear in all of it. I thought, oh my gosh, I really hope they all get with the right team to the right place. And they did. We did have 2 that were triaged and ended up going to higher level of cares. One of them was because it actually was a patient of another hospital and they just decided it was better to get them there. We did a lot of thinking when it came to that. We don't do cardiac surgery. So we were trying to send our kids that we knew had cardiac surgery to those facilities that they were kind of home to. We kept twins together. We kept triplets together. It really became a little bit more of a thoughtful process than just dispersing them and getting them out. Then they're like, okay, let's bring them back. Wait, what? So we started it. They were all gone by the 30th and then trickled over the next week. Our start date was the 10th, October 10th. We were going to start bringing patients back. We were going to do it in stages so that we didn't overwhelm the staff, because now you've got staff who are home working on their houses. We did have 2 members on our team who lost their houses completely. And throughout the hospital, this is what we're dealing with. Lots of people who have lost houses. So we don't want to overwhelm them, but we also want to remind them they have a job to go back to and responsibilities and life to still handle too. So we started looking at trickling them back in, the max we could take each day, not doing it all at once. What resources? This was the part of the disaster plan we had never figured out. Who's paying for it? What are we doing? How are we going to do this? So we get on a call. We develop kind of this triage thing. Are they being discharged within 5 days? Because if that's the case, we're not going to use the resources to bring them back. Let them get discharged. Let them go home. Do they want to come back? Do they have a house to come back to? Is that facility under critical staffing, under critical whatever I'm trying to think of at the moment that I've totally lost my train of thought? But do they need to offload some of their patients? Do we need to prioritize getting those patients back? Capacity. That's the word I was looking for. Capacity. And so in the end, we did bring patients back. This was kind of these cars are still out there waiting to be towed. This is me working in the NICU diligently talking to everybody. I finally was able to start tracking flights. So we did use the 1 FEMA team for as many flights as we could, because the state said you still have it for another week, go ahead and use it. The rest of them were done by other teams as well. We as a transport team went and got a few as well. And then from us, we ended up having them bill us, and then we're submitting it to our FEMA from the hospital side of things. I laugh because this is one of those ambulances. They didn't have the inverter on. They're like, why isn't our isolette working? Thank God we had the warming pad. He was all on the side. Yes, exactly. It goes under the baby. It goes under the baby. This was, I'm just going to play this. This was our last baby coming home. I had no idea the impact of restaffing the NICU would have on this team too, right? Because we were worried about bringing them back in. They were all super excited to just be back to a little bit of normalcy and take care of the patients that we do on a daily basis. We brought 33 kids back over 2 weeks. We really kind of maxed out at about 10 a day. Some got sicker, some got worse, some needed procedures. So we kind of kept changing it on a day-to-day basis and just constant communication and contact with the facilities. I had kept a list of where everybody had gone, so I knew what teams had transported. I had really talked to those facilities, reached out to them to say who's coming back, who's not. So it was really kind of a communication aspect of it. I go back to those HICS forms. So on there, it says MRN number, which is like your hospital account number. Whereas for us, we work off of CSN numbers, which is like the number for that incident. But I was like, okay, I'll use the MRN number. Thank God I did. They all came back with different names, or some of them came back with different names. Because as a NICU baby, you're admitted as baby boy, girl, mom's name, or baby boy, mom's name. They came back with their birth certificates names. So I at least had date of birth and I had MRN number for my 2 patient identifiers, because some of the names were completely different. I would have never thought of that. Thank God these people disasters get it, because I was like, 56 of them were discharged. 4 of them are too sick to stay. We did have 5, but that actually ended up only being 2 by the time the 2 weeks were done. That didn't want to come back. Then we talked about having a debrief. And actually, we didn't do it until January. So I feel like we probably would have had a little bit better input had we connected a call. But at that point in time, we're all still trying to put our lives together. Didn't really happen, but we really kind of did a SWOT analysis from the state side, from our NEO-PD teams and ours. And these are kind of some of the strengths. We'll go through it. I got plenty of time. The early communication was a key, really talking with the team, having that backup. If I didn't have self-service, who was going to run this? So I'd really talked with Julie. I had talked with the state to say, hey, if you can't get a hold of me, just do what you need to do. But, you know, here's our backups. Not having that middleman and having me to kind of run it all, it really was what was successful. And I don't say that to toot my own horn. I just say it because that is really what made it successful. It was me having all those conversations. Was I jungling 4 phones? Yeah. Was it hell? Yes. But it got done. We were used to that interfacility mentality as well. So we were used to the packing up, getting them out. It wasn't a scoop and run like I talked about. I say it was a strength, and I still don't know if I will stand to it. We did send one of our teams from Golisano, the transport team, out on transport to Miami, which in all ends up being a 6-7 hour transport to take 2 babies because we could take 2. In the middle of it, I was like, we just need to get these babies out. This is your responsibility. This is your job. I did not think of the mental aspect. Some of these team members still didn't know if their families were okay. Some of them didn't know that the houses were gone. So I say it's a strength, but I would say if you're in the middle of something, think about your people too. If you've got enough resources, don't use your resources. Think about what they're going through mentally. The kids got their safe and they got their back, but I would kind of second guess some of that decision. Our repatriation, by the way, I didn't even know that was a word. When it came to disasters, I learned that. We had one NEO taking the call, which was good, taking report for these babies that came back. I wish we had done that on the way out as well. And then the relationships. I've said it a million times already, but it really would not have happened had we not had these relationships, had we not had these constant communications. Weaknesses. So we talked about the paperwork. Having our disaster plan does actually have a transfer sheet that you could fill out. None of us even really thought about it in the moment. So they were printing out the discharge summaries. They were printing out the MARs. And then I said, best bed placement, too many cooks in the kitchen. We didn't have ambulance tracking. I couldn't give proper ETAs to the hospitals receiving these kids. And that became a challenge because they're like, we brought staff in, but we don't know when they're coming. And I didn't know when ambulances were returning until I knew that they were there and I being radioed to say, hey, this team's here. Now they can take the next one. So really being able to track some of those to give better ETAs really would have been beneficial. And then I asked my command center for a fuel depot, never got the answer. I finally had to figure it out, but really not being able to tell all these ambulances where they could go to get fuel. So our opportunities really were streamlining some of the paperwork. And then what does it look like to even possibly use some of the isolates throughout the state on some of the ambulances? Or was this the best process with just using some of our NEO teams? Redistributing teams to help. Like, could all Children's have brought 3 teams down to ride in another ambulance to help get some of these kids out? Let's face it, we're all limited in our resources, right? But sometimes maybe thinking out of the box a little bit. And then the special needs. For those of you that were in my previous talk, you know this is kind of a little bit of a passion of mine for special needs kids. We had 11 kids who were sheltered at our hospital. So we became a special needs shelter for kids. So we had 11 of them with caregivers. We weren't providing care. They were sheltered in our hospital. Your shelter's gone now. So now what? So we ended up getting them 2 shelters, but the conversation was, should we have just admitted them and sent them to other hospitals at that point in time? Because going to those community shelters, is that really the best place for them? I don't know the answer to that question. And then plans for families at receiving facilities. Some of these facilities were amazing. They threw baby showers for these families. They raised money for these families. But also having them think about, where are you going to put these families? Are they allowed to stay in the room? Is your NICU an open NICU? Is your PEDS unit? I mean, do you have places for these families? Because some of them are going to come with them. And then the threats, really what we came up with, it became a statewide issue with the weather because it sat so far north on us for so long that we were limited in where we could send some of them, and then the flooding. This is my thanks to the 11 transport teams that helped us throughout the state. And I didn't end my stars with a quote, but I always end mine with quote. But I'm actually going to leave you. Dang, I timed this pretty damn good. This is great. I made a video about a week after in preparation for AMTC. So if any of you were at AMTC, I'm sorry, you're going to see the same video again. But it was really kind of a thank you video to the teams that helped. And it really is somewhat impactful.
Seven years ago, we put together a disaster plan to where we would respond and help move any neonatal or pediatric specific patients and still provide them with the care that they needed. So we came together as a group and developed a plan. After Hurricane Ian came through, the system here at Golisano and Hill Park lost water pressure. The area flooded, and we could not flush toilets. We didn't have anything to use water to adequately take care of these patients safely. We didn't have enough water pressure to put out any fires, if any fires had come. So the decision was made to evacuate all the patients. Never in my life would I have imagined that we would have put this plan together in my own home and put it to use and effectively the way we did. This group has become family. This 10 years that I've been involved with this association, they've taken care of us tremendously. They responded with their aircraft. They responded with their ground crew. We meet quarterly, and no one ever anticipated using it to this true magnitude. Teams that flew in even brought us water and food. There's just not enough thanks and love and support to even provide back to them for our appreciation. We had teams come from California, Texas, Oklahoma. I don't even really know where all they came from. They just showed up. And then our teams here, even our own team here at the hospital, who had no idea if their family was safe, had no idea what their house was like. Then they went on the road for over 6 hours to help these babies. In less than 36 hours, we were able to safely move 61 neonatal babies out of the area, evacuate them from our hospital to all over the state. Without the association, it wouldn't have worked. Some of these neonates were less than a pound. They needed the special isolates. They needed the special equipment to get out and stay alive. We really had to triage who was stable enough to be able to go on a stretcher and then who needed the isolates. But without any of these people, it wouldn't have worked. Thank you. You saved lives. You sent your love. And even as we're recording this, we're still trying to figure out the other side of this and how to bring some of them back when we can. There's no words.